you take out my cell phone and take a few pictures? Yeah, thank you.
Labas rytas, mėly kolegos, dear gymnasium students, dear university students, dear teachers, dear colleagues, dear all who have gathered today here at Vytautas Magnus University or virtually to enjoy this special lecture. Today we are deeply privileged and extremely happy to have with us a scholar of world prominence, a naturalist, an anthropologist, a primatologist, and above all a humanist, Professor Birutė Galdikas, a Lithuanian by origin and in her heart. 50 years ago, in 1971, Professor Galdikas, together with two other young scientists, Jane Goodall and Diane Fossey, became known as the Trimates, a group devoted to studying the great apes. Professor Galdikas went to the island of Borneo and established there the first orangutan care center, where she continues to work in protecting the entire ecosystem from oblivion. For her lifetime dedication to preserve biodiversity, to support environmental justice, and especially to inspire equality of women and inspire the youth, this year Vytautas Magnus University has nominated Professor Birutė Galdikas for the Nobel Peace Prize. Today the time is very precious, and that's why I'm not going to take it anymore and give the word to our dear Professor Birutė Galdikas. Let's welcome her.
Thank you very much. Labai ačiū. Labas rytas. Aš turiu atsiprašyti, kad aš nekalbėsiu lietuviškai. Man labai sunku kalbėti lietuviškai, tai aš kalbėsiu angliškai. So please forgive me. I do speak a little bit of Lithuanian, but it's difficult for me to speak academically in the Lithuanian language, so again I apologize, but I will speak in English, which of course is the global language of science. We don't need Esperanto anymore because we have English. So I'm very pleased to be back in Lithuania. I always very much appreciate the time that I do spend in Lithuania. My parents came from Lithuania. My parents were very sort of loyal, patriotic Lithuanians. And I did go to Lithuanian school every Saturday morning until grade 10. So I did learn about Lithuanian culture, the old Lithuanian religion, and the Lithuanian language, which I did speak with my father. But my mother learned to speak English very well. So with her, I spoke English. So for the last 50 years, I have been fortunate to be able to study wild orangutan populations in Indonesian Borneo, which is called Kalimantan. And I've also been involved for 50 years with the protection of tropical rainforests in Indonesia, and also the rehabilitation of wild-born ex-captive orangutans in Borneo. So this is a picture that was taken maybe 45 years ago, and I often give talks to elementary schools and middle schools in the United States and Canada, and I've been amused because little children have asked me, during the question and answer period, who is this woman? and I explained that it's me. Well, 2 days ago, when I gave my lecture, somebody came up to me, and it was an adult, and she asked me, "Is that you?" Similar question, slightly different wording. So I've been very fortunate to have been able to study orangutans in the wild and work with orangutans for the last 50 years. And I want to give my thanks to the Indonesian government, because even though there have been tremendous problems and issues, especially with orangutan conservation, I have been able to endure, I've been able to survive, and that is because I did have the support to a large degree of the Indonesian government. So again, I was very fortunate because, because I had a mentor. And one of the things that happens, especially with women in academia and in business, is it's very hard for them to break through the glass ceiling because they don't have a mentor. Well, I have had a number of mentors in my life and my scholastic career, but the main one I think was Louis Leakey. I was not his student. He gave a lecture at UCLA where I was a graduate student, and I asked him for his help. I went up to him, I said, I want to study orangutans, will you help me? And one thing led to another, and he said he would help me. Again, it's a long story that I don't want to repeat, but he said he would help me, and it took 3 years. From the time that I first contacted Louis Leakey, went up to him after a lecture at UCLA, it was 3 years before I finally went to Borneo. And when you are in your early 20s, as I was then, 3 years seems like an eternity. Now, 3 years goes in the blink of an eye. You know? Somebody says you have to wait 3 years, no problem. But it was like, I never thought I'd get to Southeast Asia. And I was very fortunate because I married Rod Brindamore, and Rod Brindamore agreed to go with me to the forests of Southeast Asia and help me study orangutans. I went up to Louis Leakey because during the lecture that he gave at UCLA, he talked about his encouragement of 2 other women, and one was Jane Goodall in her study of chimpanzees, and of course we all know that, you know, Jane Goodall basically became a legend in her own time. You know, she's a UN ambassador for peace, so on and so forth. And the other woman that he helped was Dian Fossey. And again, Dian Fossey actually came up to him and asked him for his help. So I was the 3rd one. And we became known as the Trimates. And Louis Leakey had a great sense of humor. It was kind of a slapstick kind of humor. And so he enjoyed calling us the primates. And then he would laugh and giggle. You know, he had a very infectious kind of laugh. And the reason he would laugh is because in the Anglican Church, a primate is a high-ranking cleric. And so from his usage of the word primates, people started calling us the Trimates. And again, I feel very privileged, I feel very honored to be part of this, this trio with Jane and Diane. And I have to say that Jane, in the very early days of my research, when after Louis Leakey died, and when, you know, I wasn't quite sure what was going to happen, Jane stepped in. And like an older sister, she actually found a little bit of funding for me, and she encouraged me. I don't see her now, but she works in Africa, and she's very focused on Africa. Now, before I talk about orangutans, I'd like to put orangutans into context. And so the orangutans are a great ape. And right now, this includes the chimpanzees, the bonobos. When I went to Indonesia, they were called pygmy chimpanzees, but they're not pygmies. They are chimpanzees. Their ancestors probably separated from the ancestors of chimpanzees somewhere between 500,000 to 1 million years ago. And gorillas, of course, and then orangutans. And orangutans are the sole Asian great ape. So I'd just like to mention a little bit about chimpanzees. Chimpanzees are our closest living relatives in the animal kingdom. They share approximately, I say approximately, 98.4, 98.5% of their genetic material with us, which means basically they share 99% of their genetic material with us. Their ancestors separated from our ancestors about 7 million years ago. They basically are our sibling species. And chimpanzee social organization is probably somewhat similar to what the social organization of the earliest hominins was. And that is, now this is all speculation, this is all hypothesis, but it appears that we, in many ways, were like chimpanzees, and indeed are like chimpanzees. So what are chimpanzees like? Well, they live in male-bonded communities, and these male-bonded communities defend territories. And one of the things that Jane Goodall documented was genocide, where one male community, it was the Kasakela community, went to war, and I use human terms, the equivalent of war with another community, the Kahama community, and wiped them out, killed every single male in the Kahama community. And the interesting thing about this was when Jane was studying them, she had a feeding platform in which she brought bananas. And in fact, over the years, she brought tons and tons and tons of bananas, which of course made her very popular with the local people. And so what had previously been two separate communities sort of became friendly, because there's no reason to, to be aggressive, because Jane Goodall unknowingly had put her feeding station on the border, the territorial border of the Kasakela and the Kahama communities. And we know that these were once separate communities because her students and her associates kept very good records, and whenever chimpanzees from the Kahama community came to the feeding station, they always came from one direction, and when other chimpanzees that later were identified as the Kahama community came from another direction. So they never came from the same direction. They each came from their separate territories. Well, something happened. Jane Goodall got a student from Harvard. And I don't know if you know anything about Harvard, but Harvard is sort of the elite university of the United States and probably the world. And this student, he was a graduate student, his name was Richard Wrangham, and he persuaded her to stop the feeding. And what happened? Well, what happened is the two communities started to separate, and the two communities went to war. And like I said, the Kasakela community destroyed the Kahama community. And the Kasakela community took over the territory, the Kahama community, and their females. They didn't usually kill the females. So, but in a way, the Kahama community almost got their revenge, because bringing their territory boundaries to the edge of what was the Kahama community, the Kasakela community encountered an even larger male-bonded community. And at that time, most of the males in the Kasakela community were young. There were relatively few mature males. And it was kind of an iffy time for the Kasakela community, because they were going to be swamped by this neighboring community. But fortunately, most of their males, young males, grew up, and they were not destroyed, and they exist to this very day. And I apologize if I talked too long about the... You don't want to meet a group of male chimpanzees who are on the warpath. And in fact, one of Jane's students was I don't want to use the word killed, but she died during a time when she was following by herself a group of males, adult male chimpanzees. And there's still a mystery exactly why she was killed or she died. Anyways, so I've mentioned the chimpanzee social organization, but there's another chimpanzee. And this chimpanzee used to be called pygmy chimpanzees, but now they're called bonobos. And bonobos are only found in one country, one place, one location in Africa. And they are found in what is now the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And bonobos are very different from chimpanzees, even though genetically they're very similar, even though they share a relatively recent common ancestor. Because of their location, because of their ecology, their social system is totally different. Bonobos are one of the few higher primates where females are dominant. There are no male-bonded communities. Among the bonobos, male bonding does not really exist. Instead, you have female bonding. So female bonobos have achieved their dominance not because they fight, not because they have physical competition with each other. They have achieved dominance through cooperation. And the people who study bonobos in the wild find that if a male bonobo challenges or comes into conflict with a female bonobo, immediately at least one other female bonobo comes into the fray, and she will back up the female bonobo. So a male bonobo never faces a lone female. What he faces is a group of females, at least two, sometimes three or four. And what happens with male bonobos is they don't bond with each other, they don't form male gangs. A male bonobo stays with his mother well past adulthood, and his mother is his number one ally in his fights with other male bonobos. So males do have a hierarchy, and they fight for dominance within that hierarchy. But, as I said, they don't form male gangs because bonobos are famous for having what in humans would be called free sex, carried to an extreme. So bonobos will mate with anybody. And the most common type of bonding, most common type of sex is female-female. So females use sex as a type of bonding mechanism. The second most common type of sex is between males, male-male. And the third most common form of sex is male-female. So, and why do bonobos have free sex? Why is there not much bonding? Females generally do not fight with each other. I've spoken to people who have studied bonobos, and they say things like, in the 20 years that they have studied bonobos or worked with bonobos, they have only seen a fight between females, two females, only twice. And in each case, what happened is the female bonobo, went to the other one, grabbed her infant and swung the infant around, didn't touch the other bonobo female adult. And then immediately another female would come in and, take the infant and give the infant back to the mother. So I'll mention something else about bonobos before I go on to gorillas. And there was an incident where 5 African research assistants were following bonobos in the forest. And they followed them for a week or more. And then suddenly, a senior bonobo female must have given a signal because the bonobos attacked the research assistants, 5 of them. And they ripped the faces, basically brutally savaged, 3 of them. But they didn't touch 2 of them. And why did they not touch 2 of them? Anybody have a guess?
Female?
I'm sorry?
Because they're female?
Because they were women. You know, I mean, this cooperation among women or females in bonobos is so deep that they're known, they won't touch women. They won't attack them.
Male?
What?
Bonobos were male or female? Bonobos?
No, this group was male and female, because the dominant individuals in the group are females, older females, you know, who have actually come from outside, just like chimpanzees. Chimpanzees, you know, leave their natal group and move into a neighboring group. Well, bonobos actually do the same thing, but male chimpanzees, when they go into a neighboring group, they don't go into a neighboring group. They can't. They'd be, you know, killed, destroyed, whatever. The female chimpanzees will leave their group and go and mate with the males of the neighboring group. And female chimpanzees have a passport. And that passport is their sexual swellings when they are perceptive or receptive. In other words, they only leave their natal communities when they are ovulating, when they want to have sex. And the males, of course, eagerly accept them. But female chimpanzees, not so much. But they can't attack the females, the strange females, because those females are surrounded by males who want to mate with them, and the males will protect them. But when a bonobo leaves her community, natal community, she bonds, she sucks up to the females. She doesn't bother with the males. And she becomes part of this bonobo community. So, why the differences? You know, why are chimpanzees, you know, the average person can't tell the difference between a chimpanzee and bonobo. I mean, it took me a while to be able to look at a picture and decide whether it was a bonobo or a chimpanzee. What happened? Why are bonobos so different from chimpanzees, even though genetically they're very similar? Ecology. Because where they live, here, south of the Congo River is like here, there are no gorillas. The gorillas disappeared. And I'm told, I haven't seen, there are no baboons. What? Oh, sorry. I didn't realize that. See, I can see them, you can't. Okay, so bonobos are only found south of the Congo River, here in what is Democratic Republic of the Congo. And their ecology is different from chimpanzee ecology because there are no gorillas. Gorillas disappeared. And baboons, I'm told. I haven't seen this published, but bonobo researchers have told me there are also no baboons. So, bonobos were liberated. And this liberation allowed them to evolve female dominance. So my point here is a very simple one. And my point here is that ecology determines social organization to a great degree. And it's really true, because if we look at the 1960s in North America, that coincided with the rise of the hippies, also free sex, and it had to do with the great increasing prosperity of North America. You know, the United States was fighting the Vietnam War, and the military industrial complex was producing planes, bombs, whatever. There was massive prosperity in the United States in the 1960s, and that prosperity, economic prosperity, helped fuel a certain type of liberation in the youthful generations. And we, at least in North America, still are the products of that liberation. Now there's been a counter movement, part of Americans have become increasingly conservative, but it's a very interesting situation between bonobos and chimpanzees. Well, we also have gorillas, and gorillas are the greatest of the great apes, and gorillas, males, when they become mature, they develop a silver back or a white back. That's how you know when He is no longer a blackback, he's a silverback. He's fully mature. And gorillas live in what are called harem groups, although people don't like that word, which is 1 or 2 adult male gorillas who have attracted female gorillas from their natal groups. And again, it has to do with ecology. Gorillas are the most herbivorous of all the great apes. In the mountains where Diane Fossey studied gorillas, they actually had very little access to fruit because she was up in the, the higher elevations. And the groups in the mountains are very, very relatively small, but the western lowland gorilla, sometimes they have several males, silverback males in a group, which is rarer in the mountains where and this is a group of, I believe, tourists. I didn't take this picture. And when you go visit mountain gorillas, as many tourists do, the rules are very strict. The Rwandan and Ugandan park rangers make sure that you stay away from the gorillas because of the possibility of disease transmission. And the people who actually study gorillas for years have been wearing masks because of the fear of disease transmission from humans to gorillas. Gorillas are also very closely related to humans. They would share maybe 98% of their genetic material with us. But gorilla male competition for females is one-on-one, single. They're single fighters. It's never been reported that 2 male gorillas will fight one. It's always single, one upon one. And if you look and think about this, sexual dimorphism of gorillas is extreme. Males are 2 or 3 times the size of females. And if you look at chimpanzees, you might not have noticed it, but chimpanzee males' sexual dimorphism is about the same as humans. Human males are, somewhat bigger than, larger than women. And in fact, the difference is so slight that now, there's all kinds of controversy because, what are they? They're transsexuals, males who believe they were born female, and so they dress and act like women. And there are also many women who feel that they were born as males. But those women tend to stay more underground, more secret, because it's dangerous. Maybe not this very moment in time, but 10, 20, 30 years ago, it was very dangerous for a woman to be a man because she would get beaten up by men. That was the attitude then. So a chimpanzee could also become a transsexual. I have to look very carefully when I watch Jane Goodall's films to see who is male and who is female. But single fighters, they grow large, they grow very ferocious. And gorilla males are actually relatively gentle, but they're single fighters. And people, when they first start studying gorillas, and they have a gorilla male charge them, they often defecate in their pants. They often urinate in their pants. Well, it's just so frightening to have a 300, 400, 500 animal charging you. And I had that experience also when I was in the Virunga volcanoes where mountain gorillas have their home. And we were charged by a blackback, and it was in Uganda. And the Ugandan rangers were all 6'2", and so I felt no fear. What I did is I stepped behind the ranger that I was with and let him deal with the issue. And so the blackback came straight towards us, turned, and didn't really attack. But the Ugandan ranger, had taken out his machete and he was in front of, cutting the vegetation. So And I remember thinking, I feel like I'm in a movie. I didn't feel that, they were attacking. Okay. And now we have orangutans. This is the animal that I have been studying for the last 50 years. And in Indonesia, the word orang is person and hutan is forest. So orangutans are seen as people of the forest. And traditionally, Indonesians, primarily the Dayaks and the Bataks, the indigenous people where orangutans have their ranges, have believed that orangutans could speak, but they chose not to because they didn't want to be put to work. They preferred staying up in the canopy of the forest, eating wild fruit. And what we have learned is that orangutans are, like chimpanzees, frugivores. Orangutans spend over 60% of their time eating fruit, and they also wild fruit, and they also eat young leaves. And when there is no fruit, they turn to bark. And if there is no fruit, because the fruiting seasons in the tropics are not quite as predictable as they are in temperate zones, orangutans turn to bark. Well, as you can imagine, bark is not particularly nutritious. And sometimes, if these droughts that facilitate a lack of fruiting go on too long, orangutans die of famine. Orangutans starve. And there are researchers who have done metabolic studies of orangutans, and they find when there's no fruit that wild orangutan populations are in trouble. Well, if you cut down the forest, there's massive deforestation now in Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Malaysia, which is where orangutans are found. Orangutans are in trouble. Their food is gone. And so most orangutans live in Indonesia. Here, in this part of Borneo, which is known as Kalimantan, and in northern Sumatra, and all of Sumatra is Indonesian. And you have maybe 10-20% of orangutans living in northern Borneo, here the state of Sabah and the state of Sarawak. This is Brunei. There are no permanent orangutan populations in Brunei, which is a pity, because Brunei is a very wealthy nation due to their oil, and they actually protect all their forests. So you occasionally have orangutans wandering through Brunei, but they don't stay. And every once in a while, they publish an article. They met a subadult male or a male orangutan, but he was wandering. There's no populations. So like I said, it's a pity. It's a wealthy nation. They probably would do well in Brunei. And the orangutans from the two different islands, Sumatra and Borneo, look different, and you can usually tell the difference. And this is Sumatran orangutan. And you can tell he's Sumatran a little bit from the color of his hair. They tend to be more blonde. And also from the white in his beard and the hair on his face. And they also tend to have slightly more elongated features and faces. So my study area, initially it was 3,500 hectares, and this was in a national park. And again, we were somewhat instrumental, quite instrumental, in persuading the Indonesian government to establish a national park in the area where I worked. It was a reserve, a wildlife reserve, which means that you can't kill the animals, but you can destroy the habitat. So when I first went to Borneo, I was actually escorted to Tanjung Puting, what is now Tanjung Puting National Park. There were lots of people there. I mean, the population densities in Borneo are relatively low, but they were wild rubber tappers. They hunted deer. They fished in the river. This is the Konya River, which is a black water river. And much of the study area consisted of peat swamp forest. And so in the early days, I mean, I would follow orangutans, you know, up to my armpits in water. And it wasn't just your usual water, it was, you know, very acidic. It was black. Like I said, the Sequoia was a black water river, which means that the acidity sometimes reached the same level as table vinegar. And I had a student who was very allergic, and my God, he couldn't go into the swamps. I mean, his legs were like sore. And I had a little bit of those problems, but not too much. So it was a very watery universe. And this is one of the reasons why people had not successfully studied orangutans before I went and did my research. Now, there were people who did excellent studies of orangutans. John McKinnon was one of them, but he only spent a year. I think it was in Sabah, and then 6 months or so in Sumatra. You know, nobody studied them long term. And when I went to Borneo, I didn't know I was going to go to Borneo, but the Indonesian Forestry Department steered me to Borneo. They said nobody has done a study of orangutans in Kalimantan, Indonesian Borneo, and you look like the kind of person who wants to be a pioneer. They know how to flatter you. And, you know, if the Indonesian government is telling me that I'm going to go to Borneo, I listen, because I initially wanted to go to Sumatra. And, you know, life makes decisions for you. Your fate is kind of settled. Well, I had a vision. I had a dream. And my dream, when I went to Borneo, although initially I wanted to go to Sumatra, was that I would go to Borneo, I would go to the forests of Southeast Asia, and I would study orangutans. And I would learn more about them than any other person had ever learned, and that I would stay, that I would devote my life to studying orangutans. And in this I had a model, and the model was Jane Goodall, and the model was Diane Fossey. I didn't really know that this was my model, but you know, when I met them, when I learned about them, didn't become friends with them, became sisters with them, I realized that this was a possibility. And that's what I did, and I've been very fortunate that the Indonesian government has allowed me to do that. Again, orangutans live primarily in lowland forest. Their number one habitat is peat swamp forest. That's where the highest densities are found in Sumatra. You have densities of 5 individuals per square kilometer. In Borneo, here in the peat swamp forest, the density in my study area is 3 individuals per square kilometer, and which is the highest density that's been recorded in Borneo. And again, it's because my study area consists of at least 1/3, maybe to half, peat swamp forest. And as I mentioned, orangutans are fruit eaters, and this is a little burr. And whenever this comes into season, and as I mentioned, the seasons are unpredictable. You never know what's going to be fruiting, because each species of fruiting tree, has its own micro triggers in the seasonal climate. You know, so when lorangan, which is a type of burr, comes into season, the orangutans are all eating it. There's many, many trees there. We have at least 600 species of trees in the general area of the study area, because we keep phenological plots, and we follow not only the orangutans, but we also follow the trees. The phenology is the fruiting and flowering of the local trees. Anyway, so lorangan, you know, fruits sometimes once a year, sometimes it fruits several times a year, sometimes it doesn't fruit at all. But what the orangutans do, they're very skillful at processing many of these foods. They take a bunch of these burrs, right, and they put them on their hand, and then they go like this. And so the little burrs are shaken off, and then they pop them into their mouths, spit out the skins, and swallow the sweet bits of pulp that surround the seeds. Well, I'm totally innocent, I'm watching them. And of course I try to do what it is that they do. So the first time, I walked there, I'm watching them pick up these burrs, I have them in my hand, and they're a little bit, they hurt a tiny bit, but not too bad. I take a handful and I go like this, and I scream in pain because I do not have the thick hand skin of the orangutans. I never tried that again. And in fact, when sitting under a larangan tree, I discovered that these burrs that the orangutans are processing are, falling down. You don't quite see it, but there's a rain of these burrs. And so, I get very itchy. I'd have to go home to my camp and, wash my clothes, because otherwise I couldn't wear them because of all these tiny burrs. But the interesting thing about orangutan foraging is that the dominant trees in the tropical rainforest where I work are legumes. And orangutans mainly are seed dispersers for the fruits that they eat, with the exception of the legumes. They eat the beans that are inside. And this is a type of bean. It can be quite long. And the local people also eat this bean, except they usually cook it. And in Java, these trees are semi-cultivated. And you can go and buy these kinds of beans, they're called petai, in the local markets, not only in Kalimantan, but also in Java. So my experience has been that virtually all the fruit that orangutans eat, we humans can eat. And, before the destruction of the tropical rainforest made it difficult, the local people would actually gather wild fruit and sell it in the local markets. And orangutans also are famous for eating durian. I don't have a picture of one. And durians are the ones that, it's said, smell like hell and taste like heaven. They kind of taste like sweet cheese. It took me a while to get used to them. And orangutans are known for eating durians. So orangutans are fruit eaters, and because they're fruit eaters, they depend on the forest. And if the forest is cut down, they starve. Or they start raiding people's gardens, because the local people also grow fruit. And virtually all of that fruit, the ancestral fruits, came from the tropical rainforest. So for instance, you have rambutan, and there is domestic rambutan, which is quite delicious, but sometimes, rarely, you find the wild rambutan in the forest, and it's extraordinary. Small, sweet, and red, like lipstick, like bright red lipstick. And of course, the orangutans congregate when these trees come into fruit. Now, I'd like to mention something about orangutans, something that is different about them than chimpanzees and bonobos. And I haven't had too much experience with gorillas, although I have visited them in the wild. People who work with dolphins have a very deep respect for them. And it's not just because they're intelligent, but also in your interaction with the dolphin. When a dolphin looks at you, he or she is not seeing what I'm seeing when I look at you. He or she, actually because they have sonar, they actually see your heart beating. They see your lungs pulsating. They see your gallbladder. They see whether or not you have kidney stones. And so dolphins actually have been used, unfortunately they're captive dolphins, to help diagnose disease. And in fact, dolphins in the United States are sometimes used, it's rare, but it happens, to break up people's kidney stones. Through sonar, they can do it. And so when you have interactions with captive dolphins, these interactions are very special and very different than an interaction between two humans. I mean, people say, "How are you?" And, I've had my share of medical problems because I've been in Borneo for 50 years and, name a tropical disease, and I've had it. Cholera, typhoid, malaria, But if you ask me, "How are you?" Oh, I've had dengue too. I say, "Fine." And I'm basically lying. But you're never going to tell, because you can't see the inside of me. But a dolphin knows. You can't lie to a dolphin. And a dolphin peers into your very soul. I mean, this is why people become so enamored of them. Well, one of the things about orangutans is that orangutans also peer into your very soul. When you meet an orangutan, they don't have sonar vision, but they look at you so intensely. They stare at you unblinkingly, and it has a mesmerizing effect. And so some years ago I read an article in a psychology journal about how to make people fall in love with you. Had a list of things that you could do. And the first thing in the list is, and actually I've tried this, not to make people fall in love with you, but to make people like you. I don't do it, but sometimes when I'm speaking to somebody very important, I want to make, usually it's a him, make him listen to me. I'll do the orangutan behavior, which is you stare into their eyes and you don't blink and you don't let your eyes leave the eyes of the person. You have to stare into their eyes. And this is what works. And that's what orangutans do. I mean, they come to you and they look at you and they stare at you, and you have the impression they're peering into your very soul, just like a dolphin. Well, the second thing that it said in this article was, if you want to make somebody fall in love with you, what you do, thank you, is you get close to them and then you just drop in front of them so they have to catch you. And that apparently works. I had a colleague who was a communications professor, and she would make her students practice these various things. I've forgotten, there were about 10 things, but I've forgotten most of them. But I remember the first 2, and this is what orangutans do. Especially the juveniles, and sometimes even the adolescents, as they come up to you, and they just drop into your arms. And the reason they drop into your arms is because if they're falling into you, you try to catch them. So I'm saying, or what I'm saying, is that orangutans, if you have interactions with them, often will engage you in a way that chimpanzees and bonobos don't. Maybe gorillas do. Not sure, I haven't had the experience. So I just wanted to make that clear. And another reason that they are so engaging, it's not so visible in this infant's eyes, but they have whites around their eyes. Of all the great apes, orangutans, especially Sumatran orangutans, but Bornean also, have whites around their eyes. So when you look at them and they're staring at you, you have the feeling that you are looking at a human, wearing a red hairy coat. So, this is just a little bit of observation. So let's talk a little bit about orangutan social organization. So orangutan males are single fighters. So what happens is that an orangutan female gives birth. She's alone because orangutans are solitary or semi-solitary, which means that a adult female will spend about 80% of her time alone. An adult male orangutan, one with a cheek pads, will spend 98% of his time alone. So once they become fully adult, they become solitary, or in the case of the female, semi-solitary. And the distribution of trees in the forest is very dispersed. So if you look at the tropical rainforest of Borneo, the nearest neighbor tree is never, virtually never, the same species as the tree itself. So if you're a fruit eater, you have to go far and wide to find those fruiting trees. And sometimes, like with durians, you have a durian tree, and they're all fruiting, or many of them are fruiting, and the closest durian tree might be 1 kilometer away or 2 kilometers away. And fruits in the tropical forest in Tanjung Puting tend to ripen slowly. So, in the beginning of the fruit season, there, maybe 1/10 of the fruits in the tree will be ripe. So the orangutans and the gibbons, who are also fruit eaters, come back to the tree repeatedly. They'll come back maybe every several days. And I reached the point where I remember a female orangutan left a durian tree, and she started heading very persistently and determinedly in a certain direction. And I knew that she was going to go to another durian tree that was 2 kilometers away. And I was right, that's where she went. Well, because I also had gotten to know where the durian trees that she was eating the fruit of were located. So, if the fruit trees are so dispersed, and if an orangutan female weighs 100 pounds, and if an adult male orangutan weighs 300 pounds, they're going to be heavy eaters. So, if you're a female orangutan, you don't want your sister with you. Because if she comes with you, you're only going to get half the ripe fruit in that tree. And part of their adaptations in terms of locomotion are up in the canopy. So when you move through the canopy, it's a slow, laborious process. And takes a lot of energy. So orangutans have a number of adaptations that make it possible for them to live on fruit, which is, low calories, mainly consists of sugar, virtually no protein. And part of these adaptations have to do with their metabolism. An orangutan moving through the forest canopy uses less energy than a person sitting on their sofa watching TV. So they have very low metabolisms, slow metabolisms, which is why when you put them in a zoo and you give them a lot of food and no exercise, they get huge. Now zoos have become aware of this, so even today you may see orangutans in a zoo, a male that is so big that can barely walk, and he has a dunce cap of fat on the top of his head. Because in the wild, he'd be moving through the trees mainly, trying to reach these different fruit trees. And the males are 2 or 3 times the size of females. And this is Kusasi, who was the dominant male for a number of years in the vicinity of Camp Leakey. So, you don't want him. If you're a female, you don't want him coming into your tree, eating your fruit. You're going to be a little hostile towards him. But the problem is he's 2 your size or 3 times your size. He's got canines that are like this, and your canines are like this. So what happens is males try to consort with females. And females, they can't fight the male. But occasionally I've seen it. Once or twice I've actually seen a female go towards a male, this is an adult female, and kind of, be hostile towards him, and the male will jump out of a tree. He can't be bothered fighting a female. It's not worth his while, especially if he wants to mate with her later. But these incidents have occurred occasionally in other people's study areas. And I remember speaking to an orangutan researcher who was convinced that female orangutans were dominant to adult males because he had seen one or two of these incidents. When a female, grabbed her infant who was on a branch above her, put the infant on her side, and then charged a male along a branch, and the male startled and jumped out of the tree. Well, I think it was like if we're attacked by a chihuahua. We're dominant over the chihuahua, but we're not going to fight the chihuahua. I mean, it's just no, but what benefit will we get, right? So the relationship between males and females does exist, but it's very much a long-distance one. So what happens is a female gives birth, and she gives birth for the first time. This is one of the things that it took many years to document, when she is about 15 to 17 years of age. Now think about this. Her first offspring is when she's 15, maybe 17. And she gives birth. She gives birth alone, because she's now basically solitary. And it isn't until that infant, if it's a female, is 15, that she begins to mate. If the infant is a male, what the female will do when she comes into estrus or becomes proceptive, wants to mate, she will start pushing her male offspring, her son, out of her nest, literally. And the son, starts weaning him. He doesn't like it. He fights back. He squeals. You wouldn't believe some of the squealing bouts that I've seen. He practically, jumps head first out of the tree because he's so frustrated. He wants to, the milk from his mother. But then he leaves his mother's home range and he starts to wander. He becomes nomadic, more or less. And as he develops, he's no longer an adolescent, he's a sub-adult male, and he might be 15 years of age. He might be 18 years of age. But it doesn't yet have the cheek pads. Where am I? Oh, here it is. The cheek pads, the throat pouch, the long beard, and also the muscle. Adult males, when these hormonal changes occur, they balloon out, they develop muscle. And so they're very large. I mean, you can almost say hulking kind of creatures. And because of their cheek pads, sometimes they look almost like aliens from a different planet. But they're gentle, except when they encounter another male. And this is the evolutionary trap that orangutans have burrowed into, is male-male competition. Male hostility towards other males is the basis of their behavior. They cannot stand another male being near them. And we have seen very recently one adult male kill another one in a combat. And so males avoid each other. In 50 years, I've seen adult males come into each other's vicinity, maybe 10 times. 50 years. Maybe the most 20. But usually if one male encounters another one, one will run. And they become very combative, very aggressive when they are in the presence of an adult female who is receptive or proceptive, who wants to mate. And then what the adult males will do is they will consort with the female. They'll follow her. Sometimes they won't eat practically for days. They'll just follow her and focus their entire energy on her. Now, when there is an adult female in the vicinity, she is like a golden fruit. She attracts the other males. Not only does she attract adult males, but she also attracts sub-adult males. And, it's almost like sometimes the sub-adult males are working with each other, because a sub-adult male will appear, taunt the adult male who's consorting with an adult female, and so the adult male can't help himself. He races off to try and attack the sub-adult male, and then a second adult male appears, and he forcibly copulates or rapes the female. You know, the male that is protecting her, the adult male, is off trying to chase the first one. I have seen as many as 3 sub-adult males following a consorting pair. 3. And the sub-adult males are not preferred by the females. Even the adolescent females, so, you know, the ones that are 13, 14, 15 years old, they're very gregarious, they're very social, and often sub-adult males will join them, and often sub-adult males will copulate with them. And adolescent females really don't fight it off. But they're not interested. You know, I've seen a adolescent female mating with a sub-adult male, and I kept looking for the third orangutan in the tree because fruit kept dropping. Obviously there was an orangutan eating in that tree, and it wasn't until I focused my binoculars on the adolescent female's face and head, it was her. She's copulating with the male, she's eating. That's how much interest she showed, right? Okay, but an adult male appears, and that adolescent female will immediately, you know, scramble to him and start trying to seduce him. And, you know, some of the things that they do, you know, would probably be good for a porno film. It's almost embarrassing to watch her. She's trying to entice him, and he's eating. You know, he wants to eat, and he looks at her, and he's not interested. And a few times I have seen the adult male swipe at her, swat at her, and even kind of catch her and bite her a little bit. And then she leaves the tree, and she sits there in an adjacent tree, and she's squealing in frustration. I mean, she's really upset and angry. Like, why doesn't he want to mate with me? And the answer probably is adolescent sterility. I mean, that's my hypothesis. Because wild female orangutans generally do not give birth till they're past 15 years of age. He's just not interested. But if he's consorting with an adult female, and another male, an adult male shows up, there's going to be a combat. And this combat is one-on-one. And these combats can last for hours. And when 2 adult males are fighting, they're fighting very hard, very intensely. And I have been in situations where, you know, the 2 adult males, one chasing the other, I mean, they almost ran into me. I'm sitting on a log, and I could have reached out and touched them. It's like you suddenly realize how irrelevant you are. You know, it's the great apes in their own habitat, doing their own thing. So, adult male orangutans fight for access to females, but they only fight, at least in my observations, when an adult female is involved. And if you think about it, the interbirth interval for orangutan females is on average, in my study area, 8 years. So that female only comes into receptivity, when she wants to mate, when she's ovulating, for a short period every 8 years. So you have a lot of frustrated adult males, and sub-adult males too, wandering the forest looking for these ripe golden fruits, which are the females, mature females. And so sometimes the female will leave her consort. She'll sneak away in the dead of night before dawn. He wakes up and he's looking around and he's long calling. And the long call is the only long distance vocalization that orangutans give. And it's predominantly, almost always, just given by adult males. And it's kind of it's a locator call. So we are human, but over the years we've learned to identify wild adult males by their long calls. My assistants, who are indigenous people, are very good at that. they'll hear a long call in the distance, and they say, oh, that's Zorro, or that's Kusasi, and and sure enough, if we find that individual, that's who it is. So if we can do it, I'm sure an adult male waking up in the morning, they tend to give their calls often in the morning. When he wakes up, he hears a long call in the distance, and he says, oh, that's Zorro. Zorro is dominant. Maybe I should go in a different direction today. Avoid him. I'm sure that this goes on much more than we even know. So the long calls help other orangutans locate where a particular male is. And sometimes a male will give a long call, and of course adolescent females will show up. Sometimes an adult female will kind of saunter by. So adult male orangutans, depending on their dominance, give long calls. They may give a long call once or twice a day, even if a female is not around. And of course, it's to let females know where they are. If you want me, come and get me. Especially if you're older. That's a long call. It's not the entirety of it. A long call can last as long as 5 minutes. And if the orangutan is a far distance away, say 2 kilometers away or 3 kilometers, all you hear are the trumpeting peaks of the call. And he begins his long call by sighing, by grumbling, and then it builds up into a series of peaks, and then it kind of subsides in a series of grumbles. And the local Dayaks say, when they hear the long call, they say that the male is calling his bride. He's trying to call her back because she left him on their wedding day. And it's really true. These calls are related to orangutan social behavior and very much their organization. So you have females who stay in the areas where they were born. They don't travel very much. They're closely related. And you have males who come from other areas. And so the genetic diversity, and I'm not a geneticist, but this is what people who study genetics have told me, is that the females are very closely related. The genetic diversity is minimal. But you have adult male orangutans come through, and that adult male orangutan might be from 100, 200 miles away. I mean, he may be from the other side of Borneo. So an orangutan male dies a long distance from where he was born, while an orangutan female dies, more or less where she was born in the same area. So you have a social organization where you have the females staying put. That's kind of like chimpanzees. Chimpanzees also, except chimpanzees and bonobos leave their natal community. The females leave and join neighboring communities. Gorillas, the males leave and wander until they start attracting females, and they form their own little groups. But the orangutans, the females stay put, and the males wander, and goodness knows where they go. I suspect that we have had males come through our study area who were born in East Borneo on the other side of the island. And the males do not stay put. They're adult males that we've met. They come in the edge of the study area, and in a week, they're out of it, and we never see them again. Females. There are females that I met in 1971 who I was still meeting until one female died, but almost 3 years ago. And she was an adult when I first met her. So the females stay put, but the males travel. And the males engage in these combats for access to females. But there's one thing that I do want to mention very briefly, is orangutan immatures, adolescents, and subadult males, when they leave their mothers, they become gregarious, they become more social. So you find groups of females adolescent females traveling together, sometimes even grooming each other, something you virtually never see among adults, except the mother will groom her offspring. So during this gregarious period, subadult males will follow adolescent females. And I believe that part of it is learning, because the adolescent female was born in that area. She knows where the fruit trees are. She knows where the roots are. A subadult male doesn't have to learn these things. All he has to do is just follow a female. He finds all those things out. So that's their social organization. And this is why adult male orangutans cannot be kept together in zoos. They kill each other. Orangutans make a nest virtually every day and every night in the trees. They also are different from the African apes because they will make an overhead nest, and they love to put things on their heads. They're always stealing our... Okay, so they can use tools. They steal our boats. But I want to talk about the threats to the orangutans and now. And I've mentioned why orangutans are particularly vulnerable to extinction, because if you give birth for the first time when you're 17 years old, you kill all the females and you're done. The wild orangutan population in that area is extirpated. So illegal logging, and this is me taking a picture of illegal loggers in our national park. There's illegal mining, strip mining, and initially it was for gold dust, now it's for zircon. So if you have a BMW or a Mercedes and you have a bulletproof windshield, there's a chance that the zircon for that bulletproof windshield came from our area. And that's what the mines look like, strip mines. Pet trade. But the most important threat to orangutans now is palm oil, and this is a vegetable oil. It's the cheapest vegetable oil available. The palms are very productive because they're basically a weed, an African weed. They're semi-solid at room temperature, and they're marketed as green and healthy, but they're not. And they are destroying the forest. The establishment of palm oil plantations in Borneo is the #1 reason why the forests are being destroyed. And that's what it looks like. I mean, this picture was taken a number of years ago. I'm sure if we went back to that area, that forest would long be gone. And the mechanism that palm oil concessionaires use to establish palm oil plantations is fire. And it used to be hard to, put a tropical rainforest on fire because you had to wait until the drought. You had to wait until the dry season. Well, it used to be that droughts were relatively rare. I mean, that's why it's called a tropical rainforest. Even during the height of the dry season, you'd have maybe, 5-7 days of rain. Well, now, because of global climate change, the El Nino weather phenomena is accelerating. And so before you had El Nino, maybe 7 years, every 10 years. And with the El Nino come droughts to Borneo and rain to California, except now it doesn't seem to be working so well in California. So as you get more and more El Ninos, you're getting more frequent droughts, and you're getting more frequent fires. Some of the fires are not started by humans, some of them are started by lightning. And here my assistants are leaving a forest where they were fighting for a week to help save it, and they did save part of it. And Indonesians are very clean people. They bathed 2 or 3 times a day. These men hadn't bathed for a week. So I just wanted to mention that, you can read this. Current theory predicts that certain biological attributes increase vulnerability to extinction. Well, if you read these attributes, orangutan natural history suggests that they are susceptible to sudden changes in the environment. They're very susceptible to extinction. And with the El Niños, becoming more frequent, fires, droughts more frequent, forests are disappearing. And extinction has not been really studied very well. Again, I'm a biological anthropologist by training. I'm not actually a biologist. Biological anthropologist, slightly different. But I started looking for documentation of how extinction actually occurs, and I discovered there's actually very little data. Extinction is something like that Bob Dylan song. I don't know if you know it, and I can't quote it directly, but there's a song, and the song is, do you know who loves you? That man is standing in front of you. And the woman in the song doesn't understand that, Bob Dylan loves her, the singer loves her, until he's gone. And that's the same thing with extinction, that often we know that animals are on the verge of extinction, but by the time they get extinct, we're unaware of it. We have no idea. An example are the passenger pigeons, that the first laws protecting passenger pigeons were legislated about a year or 2 years after every single passenger pigeon had disappeared from the sky, and there were millions of them. They went extinct right in front of us. The Javan tiger, there were about 10 found in Birutė Reserve, and WWF Indonesia decided to, 10 years after some had been seen, they decided to do a survey in Birutė to see how many were left. Well, by the time they got there, 10 years later, not a single one. Gone. The Javan tiger had disappeared, gone extinct, right in front of our eyes. We just assumed that they wouldn't go extinct. There were 10 or 20 of them. So I established with colleagues Orangutan Foundation International, and we work with the government as much as possible because we get our permits from the government, which means we are critical. We have to be honest, but we can't be hypercritical. We have to be a little diplomatic. And we work to rehabilitate wild-born ex-captive orangutans. And I'm putting this slide in here because the Chinese government has been breeding captive pandas and trying to rehabilitate them to the wild. And guess what? So far, not so good. They haven't been able, as far as I know, I don't keep track of it, but they have not yet been able to return a single captive-born panda to the wild. They made a movie. IMAX made a movie, and they followed a single panda, and at the end of the movie, he was brought back. He didn't succeed, and they had to say, well, at the end of the movie, maybe in future years, successful rehabilitation will take place. Well, we have been fortunate because we have a rehabilitation program from 1971 when I first went there. We established the Orangutan Care Center in quarantine, and we've worked with the Indonesian government. Initially, I did this myself. The Indonesian government, the police, mainly the police now, the forestry police, confiscate orangutans. This little one was Lanang, and he was brought to me by Sergeant Lanang, and I gave the name Lanang to him. And so we've raised many wild-born ex-captive orangutans, and we have succeeded in returning about 800 of them back to the wild in 50 years. And we also translocate wild orangutans. We rescue them and we move them to safe forests. And these are release camps. And this is one of my students from Simon Fraser University, and she's holding a little male named Somalia, and he had been released into the forest by the Indonesian forestry, but he didn't do too well, so we were able to get one of our assistants to climb into the tree and take him. And this is him a few years later, and he's now back in the wild. So the mothership is Camp Leakey. We study wild orangutans there. And this is Camp Leakey. These are two of our employees, our staff, and we have 230 local Indonesians, that mostly indigenous, that we employ. And this is Tom, who replaced Kusasi as the dominant male in the vicinity of Camp Leakey. And we have a saying, and the saying is, what Tom wants, Tom gets. And right now there's a sacks of rambutan fruit. Well, Tom and his colleagues, his fellow orangutans, ended up eating all of them, which is that it was for the orangutans, so it wasn't a problem. But they share. There's lots of food, they share. And one of the most important things that we do is we patrol the forest, including the forest that we have, let's say, with our Indonesian colleagues bought. And, you know, initially it was very hard. The police helped us, so we patrolled with the police. And now we patrol with the forestry. And this is one of our assistants. Remember I mentioned that we're peat swamp forest habitat? Well, that's what you have to do if you're in that kind of habitat. We protect ancient forests. This is probably a 500 to 1,000-year-old ironwood tree. Ironwood grows very, very slowly. You know, 200 ironwood tree might be this big in terms of circumference. We have a tree planting program. We've planted since 2017. We've planted almost 500,000 native trees. We have an education program. And so what can people do? Well, you can protect native trees to help orangutans. You can plant native trees, because that's the one thing that will ameliorate climate change. Is if everybody in the world planted one tree, it wouldn't be a problem. Plant native trees, protect native trees wherever you are. Recycle paper, because much of the tropical rainforest is cut down to establish timber estates for pulp and paper. So if you recycle paper, you know, we don't need to import paper from made of virgin tropical trees. And the most important thing is say no to palm oil. I'm waiting for sustainable palm oil, but right now it doesn't exist. So everything that you hear about sustainable palm oil is greenwashing. I'm not against palm oil, but I want to see it sustainably planted and maintained. And I was very pleased that when I bought some potato chips here in Kaunas, I didn't see this when I was buying it, but then I looked at it. It has a little stamp that says no palm oil, and you don't see that in other places. So I say congratulations. There's at least one Lithuanian, and these are Lithuanian potato chips, one Lithuanian company that is aware of the palm oil issue. So I'm sorry I talk a long time. I'm a professor, and I normally talk in 3-hour segments. So I'm actually doing quite well. Talked for 3 hours. So all I can say is that I once heard years ago when Al Gore was Vice President of the United States, he said, the environmental crisis is a spiritual crisis. And I remember that, and it's really true. It's spiritual in the sense that it affects every individual, and as individuals, we can do something about it. We can't do very much, but we can do something about it. And eventually, governments will hear what we're saying, and governments will help change the economic system or systems of our planet, because we are just like the orangutans, we're just like the bonobos, the chimpanzees, the gorillas, except that our ecology is the economy. And this is what shapes our culture. This is what shapes our lives. So thank you very much for listening to me. I very much appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this enlightening and inspiring journey that you gave us to the incredible world of the great apes. Well, we are over time, but yeah, time is ruthless. But I mean, the talk was so interesting that I believe that everybody enjoyed it without really taking too much on the time. Well, we might have just a couple of questions, and then, of course, there are many of them popping to us in the virtual environment, but maybe just a couple of, first of all, the ones who are present here. So, please welcome. Do we need a microphone for you? No, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay.
Okay, thank you, Professor Birutė, for extremely interesting lecture. It was very, very good to listen to you online. My question is, you mentioned the poaching as phenomena, yes, which is a threat to wild animals. We remember the stories decades ago that in many places in Africa, especially in Africa, there have been many cases like this. Is it still going on in Indonesia? Because I've been in Uganda, and I was surprised. I was wondering about gorillas there. Yeah, it seems they are very much protected now, and they have a very nice system now and those cases of poaching were not taking place anymore. They're telling false stories, but is it in reality like this? Indonesia, or let's say gorillas in Uganda, or another place.
Certainly, I was impressed by the park rangers that were our guides in Uganda and Rwanda. They seemed to know what they were doing. And I think because of tourism, international tourism, both the Ugandan and the Rwandan governments are paying much more attention, to gorilla protection than they were in the past. So it seems to me that the problem has been mitigated a little bit. As far as Indonesia goes, nobody really goes out into the forest and says, today I'm going to kill an orangutan. Today I'm going to find a female and I'm going to take her baby to sell. No. What happens is orangutans have very low population densities. I mean, in some forests you get maybe one orangutan every 20 square kilometers or every 100 kilometers. So the local people will go into the forest to hunt mainly boars, wild pigs, and bears to some degree, because bear gallbladders are worth something in the Chinese medicine market. But if they happen to see an orangutan and they have a blowgun or homemade rifle or homemade shotgun, they will shoot her and take the infant. So at a low level, the poaching still goes on, but it mainly goes on now with birds and reptiles, because not as much attention is paid by the Indonesian Forestry Service to those animals. So yes, it's still there, it's still going on. I know that this year there will be at least a number of orangutans killed. We won't hear about it so much because the number is little. The people who kill them are in the remote forests. So it's still there. And what we're trying to do is educate. We've gone into the schools. I mean, we're one tiny organization, OFI, but we have an education program. So since 2018, we have gone into 200 schools and many villages, and we have spoken to over 50,000 local students and pupils, elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, and we go to the villages. And since the pandemic started, we decided that we'd have even more of an impact. So our educator and her assistants will take a truckload of seedlings of native trees, which we get often from the government, and each pupil, each villager will get a tree, a seedling, and he or she will plant that seedling right then and there in the area where the talk was given. And many of the schools, are surrounded by bare areas where there used to be forests. So we're not just rehabilitating orangutans. We're not just following them in the forest, monitoring them. We're also trying to have expanded so that we speak to the local people as much as possible. And the other thing is, we are entirely local. Those 230, whatever assistants are all local people, indigenous most of them. We do have Western volunteers, and we've had Lithuanian volunteers, and this is something I'd like to encourage once the pandemic ends, that we have had people who came from Kaunas and Vilnius and other places in Lithuania and worked as volunteers. Although it's more difficult for Lithuanians because of the costs of transport, so on and so forth. But we do welcome volunteers, but once the pandemic is over, because we've had at least 1,000 volunteers. Indonesian regulations are such that it's very difficult to stay a long time. One of the volunteers that I saw yesterday stayed in Indonesia as a volunteer for 9 months, and every month he had to fly to Singapore, renew his visa. Yeah. So, but we do welcome volunteers, very much. And it would be very great to have even more volunteers from Lithuania come. Lithuanians tend to be very hard workers.
Thank you. Thank you for these encouraging words. And we have a lot of young people around here, and perhaps one day they will come to Borneo and help fulfill your dream. Coming back to the dream that you mentioned, so after 50 years, what would you say would be the continuation of your dream? What would you wish for the next years, and how would you wish this to proceed?
Well, I very much wish that the Indonesian government would work even harder and stronger to protect not just orangutans, but all endangered species and forests. Because even though, they speak golden words, they have wonderful words about the importance of their tropical rainforest. Indonesia, I think, has the third largest rainforest in the world, over their islands. And they speak very eloquently about saving the rainforest, but when it comes to giving out palm oil concessions and timber logging concessions and timber estates, they still do it. And so, we're trying to change what happens in Indonesia, and of course, it's not up to us. It's up to the Indonesian youth. And so I'm hoping that the next generation of Indonesians, or the young people, will really make a difference in terms of what the government is doing. And my hope is that the study that I initially established will continue into future generations. So now we have the grand offspring of the orangutans that I originally followed 50 years ago. And with our wild-born ex-captives, we actually have the great-grandchildren, because they tend to have not as long birth intervals, but once they go back into the wild, they do, because they have access to feeding stations. And again, it's all about ecology. So, but my dream is that this legacy continues. And this is why I am so grateful that, the Birutė Galdikas Ecology Support Foundation was established in Lithuania. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, please.
Hi, my name is and I'm from environmental NGO Žieminė Ekonomika. For the past 3 years, I spent a lot of time in the parliament trying to pursue to limit use of palm oil and pea fat in food and in biofuels, and unfortunately unsuccessful. Is there anything you would like to say to the members of the Lithuanian parliament and other politicians that have influence regarding this?
Well, the first step is to look home. And so yesterday I visited for the second time a piece of forest, and forgive me if I don't remember that. I think it's
Puno Šilas.
Puno
Šilas.
Žilas, yeah.
Šilas.
Šilas. Beautiful rainforest. And so I hope that the Lithuanian Parliament does make it a strict, does make it a strict nature reserve, including there's an area that is still being cut down because it's supposedly a genetic reserve. Anyways, so the importance is to start at home. And those 3,000 hectares in Šilas,
Punya, šilas.
Shilas, are so important. So that's my message to the Lithuanian Parliament is, it's important to do it yourselves and be a model for the world. And, as somebody of Lithuanian heritage, my parents were both very strong Lithuanians, and I'm genetically Lithuanian, except for 0.02% Mongol. It's very interesting. My mother grew up near Utana, and next to where she was born, there was a Mongol village. Of course, all gone now. But, as somebody who cares about Lithuania, it seems I was a little bit disappointed when I first read that Lithuania has less than 30% forest on its territory, its land. The Latvians have 60%. The Estonians have over 60%. So why are we only 30%? I know it's true. So it seems to me that we really have to start at home. Because isn't the goal of the EU to have every EU country have at least, 20% forest? In its country? So Lithuanians, I think, only about 1% of primary forest is protected in Lithuania. Less than 1%. So we start at home. And then we can speak face-to-face to the Indonesians. Because the Indonesians already have about 10% in national parks and protected areas. The problem is in Indonesia is that because they have a surging population, that it's very difficult to enforce the laws because people are much poorer there. Now, they're becoming richer. Indonesia is going to become a superpower. It's the fourth largest, is it the fourth largest? Certainly, after China and the United States. Might even be the third largest country in terms of population. So it's going to be a superpower, and they're doing things. And so here we have Lithuania, which has 2.5 million people, right? 2.5 million now? Yeah. And we only have 1% of the primary forests protected. So I would hope that the Lithuanian Parliament would come up to speed and make this Punya Šilas a fully protected nature reserve. But whatever the title is or whatever the category is, it's such a beautiful forest. And some of it has never been logged, apparently. Certainly not for the last 50 years. And when you walk in the silences of God, which is what the forest is, it's just such an incredible, rejuvenating experience of the spirit, of the soul. And of course the Japanese who are very extremely civilized people, their doctors actually prescribe forest bathing as kind of a medical procedure. So they have the right idea. And I know as a child, when I learned about Lithuanian history, when I learned Lithuanian literature, I know that there was a deep connection between the Lithuanian and the forest. And it would be wonderful if that connection could be resuscitated. And my parents, the reason that I went to Borneo, the reason that I had this vision is because of my parents. My parents would take me into the forest, into nature, every weekend. My mother would take me, to Hyde Park, where we lived, close to where we live, and she would show me, trees whose leaves you could use to make tea, other plants that you could use for medicinal reasons, So my father in Los Angeles, he would go into the backyard and hold out his hand, and the blue jays would actually come and sit on his hand and take the breadcrumbs. I couldn't believe it. That's how much he was into nature. These are wild blue jays. So, that's the old Lithuanian spirit, because he was a farmer before he left Lithuania. wasn't an educated person, but he had that old spirit, the connection with wildlife and with nature. And I think, to me, this is what Lithuania and Lithuanian culture represents. This kind of a harking back to the old pagan religion that Lithuanians fought so hard to maintain. I mean, Lithuanians were the last people in Europe to accept Christianity, right? The žymiausia did not accept Christianity until 1410, after the Battle of Tannenberg, which we actually visited, Eric, close by. And it's near Ponu, yeah.
Punios-Šilas.
Yeah. Yeah. So, seems to me that this is a nation that has a deep culture and a deep history of a connection with nature. So it really pleases me that Lithuanians in Lithuania are doing something to resuscitate that connection. And you know, I attended for 1 hour a forum on the Lithuanian diaspora, and I heard, and I don't know who he was in America, he was speaking on Zoom from America, from the United States, and he said, and it was all in Lithuanian, so I understood some of it, I didn't understand all of it, but I did understand one thing that he said. He said, we are Lithuanians, we are all Lithuanians, no matter where we reside, no matter where we are located. And I thought that was very inspiring.
Thank you. Thank you, and I think that we definitely have to bring to an end all good things come to an end one way or another. But we are left with a beautiful vision that you brought to us, the vision that, well, we have to fight to be in peace with nature. We have these opportunities, and we really have to make a difference, especially with our new generation. So thank you once again for being with us. Thank you for coming to Lithuania. Thank you for coming to Vytautas University. And we definitely hope that we'll have these meetings in the future, that the pandemic is over and we'll be free to travel, and we'll see you back and back again at our university. So thank you. Thank you, Birutė, so much.